Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have a very special show. We have invited Dr. Patch Adams, clown, social activist, healer at large, and well known also for his The Film, starring Robin Williams, about his life. Well, at least partly about his life. His life is actually even more spectacular, if you can believe it. And he travels around the world, speaking to people, working with children, clowning around, making people smile, making people happy who are in all sorts of very difficult situations, including in war-torn countries where kids have lost their legs and the like. And Patch and his team go in and just put smiles on people's faces and make them happy even under the most difficult circumstances. Patch is the author of a couple of books. This is one of them. He is the founder of the Gesundheit Institute, and we're very pleased to have Patch on to talk about what we feel at A Better World is the positive vision of what medicine and healing really should be. Much more holistic, a new paradigm, if you will, not simply about money and drugs and surgery and all of that stuff. As you know, those of you who watch with any regularity, we've gone far beyond that paradigm, and Patch really embodies a lot of what it is we like to share with you all. Patch, welcome to It Is a Better World. Because
it's already here?
It's already here.
Oh my gosh.
It has arrived.
Take the next week off.
You know, you bring a level of awareness and consciousness to areas that most doctors don't even hardly know exist. Your readiness and willingness to understand and embrace love, compassion, the simple, natural things of being human is something that we just don't find in places of medicine, hospitals and the like.
Well, no one should be surprised.
What you're up to and
well, no one should be surprised. No medical school in the world teaches compassion, and no primary school in the world teaches 1 hour K through 12 on the most important thing in life, loving, the verb. Not one school in the world, which I recommend that they teach the intelligence of love, not the feeling. K through 12, 1 hour a day, 5 days a week for 13 years would be a different people.
God knows. When you say the intelligence, I mean, I'm totally with you, but for our audience, what do you mean intelligence instead of the feeling?
I think feeling is something that comes after, and intelligence is something that comes before. So, feeling love doesn't drive you to be loving. Your intelligence thinks of the situation you're in and how can love be expressed.
So in a way, you're saying love as a choice, out of which a feeling may come and will come.
Well, a choice, I feel that that's different than an intelligence. An intelligence means you are actively using your mind with everything that you do so that it has the consequences that you want. And I want peace and justice and care for all people and nature. And
hallelujah.
Which is why it's so easy to not need a Gestapo if you just wipe out intelligence, which is what I think the United States has done. You make a meaningless educational system to create compliant, non-resisting consumers. You know, they say 18% of high school graduates are functionally illiterate. And that certainly fits in with what I experience in life.
As you travel around, do you see the same thing in other countries, or do you see a bit higher level?
I think it's more and more, because I think were humanity to survive another couple hundred years, which I don't see any indication will happen, I think the 20th century will be considered the last century of thinking. That we have a robotic...
If we make it to the next, it'll be a century of loving? Is that what you're implying?
Well, I know at 18 I decided to be 6 qualities: happy, funny, loving, cooperative, creative, and thoughtful. And those 6 qualities have given me everything that's ever happened with me. To bring them to every moment.
Of value. Yeah. Yeah.
And that they're a hell of a team.
They really are.
Polyphrenic.
You know, when I was saying a choice, I was thinking about the work of my one of my teachers, one of my mentors, Richard Bandler, of neurolinguistic programming. And I love the name of one of his books, which is called Using Your Brain for a Change. And in that, he posits this idea that our brain is always going and doing its thing, and so is our mind, as Zen and all the other great traditions say. But when we stop enough to say, hey, wait a minute, who's in charge here? And then kind of take it by the reins, the mind and therefore the brain, you then get different outcomes. You get outcomes that you would like to have that are based on, let's say, love and compassion and cooperation and integrity, instead of it just running amok and doing what it does.
Well, you have 500 billion brain cells with as many as 10,000 connections. And you don't think because you have a brain. You think because you've trained it. It is a training.
It's hardware.
And that if somebody trained themselves to be a thinker, they bring thinking to every single thing they do because they know it adds something to it.
Exactly. Well, I know that, like for instance, in your film, Clowning in Kabul, which you sent me and I so enjoyed, so the last thing you're thinking about is thinking. You're just in a state of deep compassion. And that's a lot of what you're
It's driven by thinking. I would suggest everything I do is driven by thinking. How else would I have come to the conclusion to be goofy? Okay? I'm not goofy as goofy without. No, I am thoughtfully those 6 qualities.
Thoughtfully goofy.
That I, without thoughtfulness, if I walked in a room of horror and I did something and nothing happened, I would leave the room and think I didn't know what to do. But if you walk in with thinking, it's not you're not thinking success, failure, going what's next, what's next, what's next, what's next, what's next.
The experience of the film, though, through your thinking, brings forward a feeling of such depth and the pleasure of seeing kids smile who are otherwise so unhappy.
You know, I'd like to, in a way, to clear that idea up. I prefer to clown for adults. Their suffering is deeper and their sense of humor much larger. People often go clown, go to children, but you know, I clowned for 5 men who were hung the next day for capital crimes in Trinidad. And it was a very powerful moment. And however lonely a child can be, it doesn't approach the loneliness of nursing homes, say, and addiction centers, and that kind of thing. So kids are easy, you know, fart jokes. You know, that's why I have a whoopee cushion in my pocket. With adults, they may have already stopped laughing at farts. And it's a way to test where they are, in fact.
It's like a meter.
And so I think kids are great. If you're new to clowning, it's much safer to be with kids.
Sure.
Blow up a balloon, make a funny face, get down on the ground, bark like a dog, and if you don't scare them, they will laugh. But with adults, it's really good to have your mind right there and sharp, remembering 10,000 other experiences.
You know, your work has been renowned around, of course, the world, going in with children and everybody and working with them in different ways. You're also a doctor, and I know you have this fantastic thing within the Gesundheit Institute, in West Virginia, in Appalachia, where it's poorest, probably the poorest part of the country, West Virginia. Mm-hmm. And you're building, and you've already begun to build, this extraordinary free hospital and eco-village. Tell us a little bit more about what the overall concept
I
is.
entered medical school in '67 to use medicine as a vehicle for social change. I knew the world was in huge trouble, and I wanted to figure out what's the best use of my desire for change. And I was looking for a love job for men. Women had the love jobs: teacher, social worker, psychologist, nurse. But I thought
some of that too, of course. Look, right?
Well, I'm not sure they're as loving as the.
That's another conversation.
So in any
Men
case,
than women.
I had read Tom Dooley and realized one could be a loving doctor. I wasn't a person who had to study much, so I studied healthcare delivery systems with the idea I wanted to make a hospital model when I graduated that would hear and watch and understand every problem of the way care is delivered and show a model that all of the problems can be addressed easily. And it's a duh to say free, since a medical bill is the #1 reason now that a person loses their home in 60% of bankruptcies. And of course, you'd never have malpractice insurance if you were a loving hospital. It's a huge expense and a problem. Right. Defensive medicine. I never heard anyone say anything good about insurance companies, so clearly accepting insurance was wrong. And the loudest outcry, and I keep a huge actual literal correspondence, 400 to 600 letters a month for over 40 years, that I correspond with 130 countries. I've spoken at medical schools in 76, and everywhere the loudest outcry of health professionals is more time with patients. In the US, 7.8 minutes. In Spain, 5 minutes. Nowhere does it enough.
Really?
And there are many ways to use 7.8 minutes, and you can do nothing with it, or you can do a lot if that's your constraint. But I didn't like the constraints. So I'm a family doctor, and at our hospital, you decide how much time you want to spend with a patient. So my initial interview with a new adult was 3 to 4 hours long. I also visited their home as a family doctor, and I didn't sit in the living room. I opened every drawer, went in every closet, looked under the bed and the medicine cabinet, because I thought a family doctor knew their patients. And I invited myself to dinner.
Crevice.
Yeah, that's right. I
invited yourself to dinner.
Well, how people are at dinner, you watch the children, you watch the mother and father, and
the interaction.
And they never describe themselves the way they are when they're at, or they almost never do.
When they're in the doctor's office.
Or when you visit them, and what they say is so different than what you experience.
What they're living. You know, when I, just to say, when I was growing up in New York City, the doctors came to our house. I remember the guy. I remember the stool.
You must be old.
92.
Explains everything.
No, in reality, this is in the mid-50s.
Well, that was before insurance, really.
And he checked us and looked at us, and you know, I studied traditional Chinese medicine, and that, when I think about it, what the doctors here were doing was much more like the traditional Chinese doctor, including what you're saying about spending 3 or 4 hours with a patient. They don't even use the word patient. It's a person who comes in and sits down, and you look and you touch and you see and you take pulses and you look in the eye, you smell. You know, it's a different paradigm altogether. I hear what you're saying. It looks a lot more like that.
So other qualities we had.
Yeah.
At that time, Virginia, where I was trained, the only alternative or complementary, and by the way, those words were not used when I was in medical school. They came in the 70s, later 70s. But you find out quickly with chronic illness that you want help. And so we broke the law. We could have been arrested. We never were. And did acupuncture from 1972 until... And so acupuncture, homeopathy, naturopathy, chiropractic, Ayurvedic, anthroposophic, herbal medicine, bodywork, faith healing as complements to what we were trained.
So
we
did
also
you have this, you had
let me finish the description, because I want people to really hear this. We chose never to give a psychiatric diagnosis or a psychiatric medication. We didn't find them useful. We think psychiatric illness is a natural consequence of our society. You can control a population a lot better that is mentally ill than you can control them if they're individually thoughtful. And so we did extremely radical mental health work. We also, interestingly enough,
you say radical health work, mental health.
well, I mean, just not giving diagnoses or medicines is radical. That
Actually talking and listening.
well, I offer to anybody, you know, you can stop your mental illness right now forever, but you have to want to. You have to stop liking it so much. And so, you know, they came and lived in our home, okay? And so a family, if they weren't sick, could come and stay for 3 or 4 days so we could observe them in their life. And I could say, hey, Bill, you know, I've seen you here 4 days. You haven't once played with your children. I don't see any affection with you and your wife. But none of that came up in the interview. So you get to see. So sometimes patients who said, I'm depressed, oh, gee, you know, I'm depressed all the time, I'd handcuff them to me and take them through my day with me, and I'd show them 200 times that day they weren't depressed and say, you're a braggart and you like your misery.
Bragging about depression.
And, well, it is a badge. People use their mental, most people mentally ill, it's like what parents do once their children have been misdiagnosed with autism or ADD or any of those things. It becomes the second qualifier. You know, hello, this is my little girl Sally, and she is autistic.
Daughter.
Instead of the 157th qualifier, which would make it a lot different. And so people say, I'm bipolar.
Sure, people.
And who's only bipolar?
Identity.
What a lie. We're all polypolar. And
We're all
viva
multiple
la.
personalities.
Well, that's what I meant by polypolar. And,
Yes, I know.
and so,
I like polypolar better, actually.
so the idea of the hospital was, what is the atmosphere? And so the same 6 qualities that I chose to be an instrument for peace and justice were the qualities we wanted as our hospital: happy, funny, loving, cooperative, creative, and thoughtful. In medical school, we did not get one lecture on health, not a single lecture, not on diet or exercise, and they still don't do it, not on spirit or love or literally anything to do with health. And you suddenly realize that patients in those days were not prepared. There were no magazines on exercise or weird diets or any of that stuff. Prevention magazine was the only one.
Yeah.
And so
did you speak
most
about
patients
these things when you were in medical school with your fellow students or with your teachers?
Well, some of them I had to find out, okay? So some of the, I originally designed Gesundheit, and there wasn't a big emphasis on complementary medicine because it never was once mentioned. Okay, so I didn't know anything about it. But as soon as you have chronically ill people, you look what's out there. And as soon as you spend 4 hours with a person, so I myself was wondering, what is my health? Because you would see people, they'd be overweight, they didn't exercise, and so I became an exerciser. So I've done yoga, weightlifting, and aerobics for 45 years, and that's why I feel 35. And along with, you know, deciding and not having a bad day in 54 years, that one can take charge of their life is really a simplification of what I'm saying. Sure. And that anyone, you know, the typical response of a patient, well, I can't. And if you look into their life, the normal adult didn't like themselves, didn't like their marriage, didn't like their job, and that wasn't why they were coming to the doctor. That was isness. And so what the hell can you do with that kind of person? I always shot really straight with them. So if a man hit his girlfriend or wife, I always told her to leave him now, and we'll help you move out if you want. They hit you once, they'll hit you again. There's no healing in hitting. Most would then spend 2 hours defending the husband or partner. And
So what we're seeing is that, and we both know this, that really the issues are emotional in nature. People feel hurt, people feel abandoned, people feel rejected, they reject themselves.
Well, that's how you control a population. They're so fabulous.
Well, that level too.
If you make compliant, non-resisting consumers, then you don't need a Gestapo because they feel paralyzed by illness.
We have one anyway.
Well,
it's
not
a double whammy.
Not of the quality of the Gestapo yet.
No,
we might.
That's beside the point. The point is that we're enforced from without, and the programming is such that people actually just make themselves miserable unless they've stepped out of that box.
I mean, one of the astounding things I found is in interviewing, thousands of people in 50 years, 3% had self-esteem. Almost no one in this country loves themselves. I love me. They can't say it. They cannot say it. And fascinating even more is that they cannot imagine themselves loving themselves because this is the way I am. And so we created like a wonderland, a fantasy land. Whereas the 60s, we all became farmers. I had 30 goats. We always had a play in production, theater, all of the arts. So how do you trick people to do aerobics? You have 3 all-night fast rock and roll parties a week where the ethic is dance as long as you can. And so people want to do what's right. And so we learned to dance all night to fast rock and roll.
That's great.
And so...
Is this going to be part of the new hospital down in West Virginia?
Oh, much more. Yeah, we've had 47 years to develop what we're going to be about. Imagine, in 1 year you can think up a lot of things. A lot of people start a project with 2 months of thought.
Are you going to be using standard medical equipment in addition to the holistic alternative
of course.
practices?
Surgery, OBGYN, pediatrics, internal medicine, family practice, psychiatry, and complementary care.
But low emphasis on drugs, I take it.
Well, there are fabulous drugs. Mm-hmm. Every drug will be evaluated. That I don't know that any of our staff will give out psychiatric medication. They can. There won't be a rule against it. And that I might, if one does, I might confront it. We have full freedom to confront. And so what you do is a person, the idea of the hospital is all the permanent staff lives there as a communal eco-village. Everyone from the cleaning person to the surgeon makes the same salary. We wanted it so low it scared people, $300 a month. That every practitioner can spend as much time with a patient as they want. And that you don't need an appointment, come and hang out and get to know people. We have 3 waterfalls, caves behind the waterfalls. We already have complicated outdoor sculptures and
it's already in place.
Well, a lot of it's in storage, but we just got a 8-piece outdoor sculpture that we've started to create the platform for it, where you can go and sit right with these.
And there will be a place for the patients to live as well.
Well, right. There'll be a design for mental illness and physical illness. There'll be 12 pods of 10 adult units each. Everyone will have a bedroom. There will be space for all interests. So the fully modern stage, fully modern, as if it were a fancy stage. Everything from a radio show to photography studios, fine arts, fine woodworking, ceramic studios.
A real integration of the arts with healing.
Well, we use medicine and your illness as a trick to get you into a possibility for human culture. Yeah. That's so important. So that we won't need a nursing home for our staff. We will take care of each other. If a child is born into the hospital with cystic fibrosis, people will fight for who gets to take care of the child during their shift. And that we already know where the interconnecting tree houses are, so that you could have all generations of a family stay there for a week that needs to work out something.
It's fantastic. Now, you had what I wanted to ask before was, while you were going to medical school, as it says in the, kind of suggests in the film, were you running the first version of the Christian type Institute? That was afterwards.
Right. I mean, I was doing my own individual experiments, but when I graduated, 20 adults and their children moved into a large 6-bedroom house and said we were a hospital. We were open 24/7. We had 500 to 1,000 people in our home each month with 5 to 50 overnight guests a night. And imagine how intense that is. The house was always full of intense loneliness and neediness. Dangerous. My closest friend in medical school was murdered by one of our patients. We had...
That's what the film flipped into, that woman, but...
Right. And in medical school, it actually happened 6 years after medical school, and it was a man.
Yeah, right.
And that... We ourselves were learning farming. We ourselves were learning building. We were learning theater. We were learning. So when I was the butcher, so when I slaughtered a goat, I would have the cigarette smokers blow in the goat's lungs, and you just see the black deposit in the lungs so beautifully. And I also wanted people who were questioning whether or not to eat meat. I would say, come to a slaughter, see, because I'm comfortable doing it. And if you are a herder, you're comfortable doing it because the men disappear. And
curious.
So we we are going to have 40 beds for guests. So where I haven't been a great fundraiser, I have huge numbers of friends, from string quartets and theater groups to many famous people, and anyone in the hospital. Okay, the 120 adults. For example, within the first year, I know I'm going to have a week in the school devoted to Virginia Woolf. Okay, and so anyone can do anything. It can be underwater basket weaving, but so the school will also teach what we're doing. So we'll always have, as we have always had, medical students and nursing students with us in, as we did in Ecuador. But they'll be there. And failing to fundraise, we have built clinics in schools in poor countries. So I could give one talk.
Stops you.
My normal fee is $20,000 a day plus expenses, and that can build a clinic or a school in a poor country.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for joining us. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin. Please contact me at mjr@abetterworld.net. I so appreciate your comments, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.